Okay, I'm recording it. Hi, good morning, Jonathan. Thank you so much for being here with us. We are at Wisdom Wednesday, where we invite guests to come and share some of their professional experience with us and life experience for the younger people that are initiating their professional life. And Jonathan, I'll let you introduce yourself in a minute, but he's a chairman and founder of Berstein's Crisis Management, a 27-year-old national crisis management PR consultancy and pioneer in operating a virtual consultancy. So, well, I think this past year has given you probably a lot of food for thought of what we have been going through.
That's probably true.
So, Jonathan, just tell us just the beginning of your career. Like, how did did you start it in crisis management? When you started, how did you start it?
Well, I'm a child of the 60s, so 1969 high school graduate, which means I'm officially an old fart now, and or an altar cocker, right? And but and I was, I went to college because my parents expected me to go to college, but I had no idea what I really wanted to do. I changed my majors every semester for a year and a half, and I finally dropped out because I just was directionless. And got married very young. I was 20 and she was 19. And we just decided to try to make it on our own, and didn't do a very good job of it because we weren't very employable at that point in our lives. And we tried to get work to support ourselves, and it didn't work. But every day going back and forth from this crappy place I worked, I passed an Army recruiter's office. And this was, Vietnam was still going on. This is 1971. And I had a high lottery number. I was not going to get drafted, but I'd always been curious. So finally, one day in the middle of winter, it seemed like a nice place to stop in and talk to the recruiter. And in March of 72, or actually April of 72, I celebrated my 21st birthday in basic training. So no, that was my first career, not crisis management. I spent, and I was originally trained, my grandparents were horrified, Jewish boy joining the army when he could have been, easily stayed in college and all that stuff. But it wasn't. A lot of friends and associates were just staying in college or finding other ways to avoid going in. I have always considered myself, for lack of a better term, a liberal patriot. My political values are very liberal, but I also am a patriotic American, and I felt the need to serve my country. And there I was. So, and it turned out to be good for me. Like a lot of young people, the structure of service, whether it's military or any other kind of public service, teaches you a lot about yourself, and you grow up a little bit when you're in the process of doing that. I've encouraged my four kids to all don't just automatically go to college, but take some time. If you need to take time after high school, take some time, go out in the workplace, see what's out there, find your calling, and then follow your passion, whatever your passion is, whatever education that requires.
So I'm assuming you have no military people in your family, so it's not the kind of family that came.
My father served in World War II, like so many. He and his three brothers all served, but subsequently, one of my sons ended up as a nuclear reactor operator on a submarine for 5 years, and one of my daughters is married to a Navy chief. So maybe some of my military experience had an impact on that because it was a positive experience. But after 5 years, I decided it was not a good place for me to stay because I was very outspoken, and not a good thing when you're a 27-year-old in the military to be too outspoken. And so I thought my skills would translate to becoming an investigative reporter because I was in military intelligence by then. I had been transferred from military police to military intelligence when I was in Germany. I'd worked undercover in Germany in military intelligence.
Mhm.
And then they had sent me back to the States for more training and assignment to Fort Meade, Maryland, which is where I ended my military service. And I realized that the investigative skills, the analytical skills I had learned would apply very well to being a reporter.
Mhm.
So there was a very famous columnist back there by the name of Jack Anderson, who was
Okay.
like the investigative reporter in the United States back then. And I got his unlisted home number because in the work I did in the military, I could get unlisted home numbers. And I called him up and said, Jack, this is Jonathan Berstein with the U.S. Army Intelligence Agency. I'd like to come talk to you. I think I have some information you'd find interesting. And he thought I had a leak for him.
Mm-hmm.
So I went to his home in beautiful Potomac, Maryland, and I sat down with him and I said, Jack, I don't really have a leak for you, which is what I think you might be expecting, because I can't do that. I'll go to jail for it. But I think my knowledge of the intelligence community would be very useful to you. I'm getting out of the service in 3 months. Could I have a job? And he says, yes.
That was very creative of you to just, okay.
So I ended up working as a reporter for Jack in Washington. He didn't pay very well. After a year, I just sought other work, but I worked as a freelancer for investigative work and pretty much anybody who would pay 50 cents a word, which was the going rate for a good reporter back then.
Mm-hmm.
Until 1982, when somebody suggested I get into PR, and I can continue from there. But that's to answer your first question. No, I didn't start off in PR or crisis management. I started off as a soldier.
Uh-huh, uh-huh, uh-huh. And so, what were the transferable skills that you learned or you had in the military now into crisis management?
A lot of them. In fact, a lot of what I learned in the military, particularly in intelligence work, directly transferred to my work now, very directly transferred. In intelligence work, broadly summed up, we're either trying to figure out what the vulnerabilities are in our enemy, quote unquote, or we're trying to protect ourselves from the enemy trying to do the same thing to us. That's the two. Well, in civilian life, every organization has vulnerabilities. And the same process of analyzing vulnerabilities that I use to apply to, say, a Russian tank battalion, I can apply to looking at one of my client companies and saying, okay, where are the weaknesses? Where could something go wrong? Where could somebody exploit this? And by doing that, what we call a vulnerability audit, we can actually keep them out of trouble in a lot of areas, prevent some crises from happening altogether. So the basis for that I learned, I think, in the military. And the other is analyzing at the other end. Anytime you've had a major operation of any kind, or a major in the civilian life, when you've launched a campaign of any kind, afterwards, looking at it and analyzing what did we do good, what could we do better, where are areas for improvement, who particularly did well, who did not do as well. In the military, they call that an after action report. In civilian life, we call that a post-crisis analysis. But it's essentially the same exact process.
I see. And so it seemed like you kind of stumble into the military there, right? Just going by the office and like, it's winter, it's cold. Let me get in and see what's in there. And then the next one with the journalism, you actually seemed like put more thought into it and went after that. And I'm assuming because of the pain wasn't the best for you then and there. You had a family, correct?
Correct.
Yeah. But then in crisis management, somebody made a suggestion too also. Like, did you put time and energy? Like, is this what I really want to do? Or you just like, I need to do something?
The first job I had in PR, I wanted to go into public relations. So the relative of mine actually out here who owned a PR firm pointed out that I might make a little more money in public relations, and that there was a job open as manager of corporate communications at Playboy Enterprises in 1982. And might have been the end of 81. And so I applied for it and I got it. And my main job there, ostensibly, was to do the PR for the 1982 Playboy Jazz Festival. It wasn't working with the magazine. Everybody immediately asked, was I working with the magazine and all the women involved with the magazine? The answer is no. I was corporate, but unfortunately, it was the worst year in the company's history. And I was thrown into crises. And I found that what the military calls situational awareness, I already knew I had that from my work in the military, the ability to think on your feet, even if somebody is literally shooting at you. That same being able to create some stillness in the middle of chaos is, I found, is an intuitive ability in my case. And I think it's an intuitive ability for anybody who's good at crisis management. You have to be able to do that. And so after a year at Playboy, the last press release I point out was announcing a 40% layoff, including me. All the PR department, except for Hefner's personal publicist, was laid off. But as soon as I went out and started applying to PR agencies, I asked to start doing more crisis work. I said, I love doing that. I enjoy doing that, despite all the bad news. Could you give me more work like that? And by '89, that's what I was doing full time.
Working for somebody else and doing that type of work.
Right. I worked for somebody else until January '94, when I started my own business.
And what imposed you to change, to go into business for yourself?
I don't play well with others in a corporate environment.
Good. That's good. Good to know yourself, Jonathan.
It was really almost the same thing as with the military. I mean, it's a corporate kind of environment in its own way, and I chafe. I'm a creative person. I like to work on certain kinds of business. I don't like being forced to work for clients who I think are sleazebags. And a big PR firm will take anybody who will pay the money.
Okay.
Pretty much. But I didn't enjoy that. I didn't enjoy the ethics of it. I didn't enjoy the feeling of it. I didn't enjoy the experience of it. And I made a decision then and there that I was willing to make less money in order to follow my passion, if that's what was necessary.
Right.
It turned out not to be necessary. I could follow my passion and make more money. But I didn't have that guarantee when I started out.
Right. I imagine that starting one's own business must have some trepidations there, or doubts, or like, oh my gosh, because working for somebody else is like a secure thing until you are laid off, right? And then going to business for yourself, how was that emotionally for you, that transition? Like, how was it, and what did you have that was your best asset at the time? And I'm not only speaking materially, but emotionally as well.
Faith. Faith. I'm not a religious person, but I think I've felt guided a lot of my life, and I trust that quiet inner voice. And learning to get quiet enough to hear that inner voice has been an experience. But when I can get still and listen to that quiet inner voice, I always make a good decision. And if I make a decision based on fear, like needing more money or needing security, which would be a fear thing for me, it's a bad decision. It's always been a bad decision in my life. So I have such a track record of that being true that by the time it came to making the decision to start my own business, it just the only downside to it that I could see was maybe I make less money, and I was willing to do that. Because the corporation, I guaranteed salary. With the corporation, I got a percentage of new business that I developed, and benefits and all that stuff, but never regretted it a day.
Right. And I work I'm a career coach and a life coach, and I work with mostly women in their 40s and 50s that are going through, some type of life transformation and change careers. And faith is a big one, right? The trust that, stop to be quiet enough and that you can really hear the voice that is within rather than the noise in the head and the fear. And so that is, I find that very important. And another thing that I find also is that some people are really tested, and there are some obstacles uh, big enough that they can overcome, not obstacles that would break them. So by starting building your business, did you have any challenges, tests, obstacles, or did everything sail beautifully?
Well, the biggest obstacle, of course, was being self-employed, the need to constantly develop a stream of new business. And while new business development had been part of my job for another corporation, the fact was that if I didn't develop business, I still had my salary. You don't develop business, you don't eat if you're independent.
Right.
And so that was the reality. And I was prudent before I did not, my employer did not have a non-compete agreement in place for me. So I could take clients. And I asked my clients, are you working with us because you want to work with the company? Or are you working with us because you want to work with me? And the answer was they wanted to work with me. And so several clients came with me. But the nature of crisis management work is you almost never have a client that's with you every month. They may come back to you for a particular crisis, or they'll come back to you for more training or more planning. But in between, so you have to have a whole stable of people out there so that a certain percentage of them are giving you business. And also the number one thing I did initially for our business was capture the web for our search term. We're very, very good at online reputation management. And I had a website and a blog and a newsletter out there years before many people did. So we show up very high organically for search terms, and that's what's fed my business. 95% of it's new business for years now.
And so my next question was to be, how different, because your company has been in place for 27 years now, the whole marketing 27 years ago and 27 and now forward 27 years. How different has it been to getting clients?
Oh, quite different. I used to have to do a lot of speaking engagements because to get in front of people before the internet was around, you had to get out and do speaking engagements, and a lot more writing, a lot more trying to get articles, in which I'm quoted as a source. But then as the internet got started for public consumption in the early 90s, all of a sudden we had a whole new, way to reach people. And we jumped on that. That was our number one way, and still is the number one way. It's a little different now. And my son started working for me almost 15 years ago. My middle son, Eric, and he now actually legally owns the business. So that started to make things easier for me, because as his skills developed, he was able to handle more and more of the grunt work, the stuff that I frankly not do anymore. And while he improved his skills, and so we have two of us now working at this effort of both maintaining our visibility and serving our clients. And it's come far enough that I'm this close to retirement. So.
Good for you, Jonathan. So you have your son that works for you, any more family that works for you?
No, I have one daughter who is a business and marketing major, and she does some freelance. She does web design. So when we need web design, we'll go to Kara, but otherwise, no.
So being crisis management, I imagine that you have had some crisis of your own as well that you had to solve, last minute surprises that you're not expecting. Do you remember any of those stories that you can share with us, and how you solve it?
You're talking about crisis to Berstein Crisis Management, or crisis for one of our clients?
Well, I was talking more for Berstein management, and then, you can bring in a story or two. It's always...
There have been a couple. The biggest crisis, probably the number one vulnerability for a small business, a one-person business, particularly before my son joined me, is my physical well-being. And there have been a couple of times I've been injured in sports,
Mhm.
and so much that I really couldn't work very much. And it's scrambling to make sure that my clients were covered during that time period was a challenge. We've always had a virtual business model. We don't have employees. We only work with contractors. So the good news was I do have a stable of contractors I can call on to fill in,
Mhm.
but it was still difficult to do. And at one point, my injury was severe enough and I was doing enough pain medication that I actually had to have my ex-wife, then wife, make the calls for me because I
Uh-huh.
couldn't do it.
Oh,
So,
wow.
but because the backup was fairly easy to find and I have a good relationship with my clients, I didn't lose any business from it. But it was a tough time, and obviously a
Mhm.
drop in income for that time period.
Okay. Okay. Well, it's good to see you well there today.
Yes, the parts appear to be working right now, other than a few minor complaints that anybody my age would have. So
And how about what type of crisis that you usually, as company, helping other companies, do you deal with?
we seem to fit a niche between the giant PR firms, um, which won't work for you for less than $15,000 a month, and a small firm that really doesn't have full-time crisis management capability in it. So we tend to attract businesses mostly that are smaller than Fortune 500,
Mm-hmm.
but larger than say 500,000. So it's pretty good
Okay.
range. And also
Uh-huh.
sometimes private individuals with serious reputation issues.
Mm-hmm.
And but I mean, a typical client for Eric is very much online reputation management. I mean, he has 5 different online reputation management clients right now, all of which are being attacked, criticized uh, online, getting really bad reviews online. Sometimes there's a basis for why they're being criticized that they
Right.
have to address it, and sometimes there's not. By the way, we won't take a client who won't make amends for doing wrong.
Mm-hmm.
We will not. If he just says we want you to spin this, you got the wrong firm.
Mm-hmm.
And we have resigned good paying clients
Mm-hmm.
because for the reason I started my business, I want to
Mm-hmm.
work with who I want to work with. And if you're not an ethical, responsible person, I'm not interested in working with you. I don't care how much money you have.
Mm-hmm.
But we work with every type of business other than those that are highly regulated by the government, like utilities, nuclear energy, oil and gas, because the government requires very, very cumbersome, intricate crisis plans by law that don't work.
Right. Right. Huh.
And they don't pay well, so we stay away from them, and we
Uh-huh.
don't work with politicians.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so did you mentioned ethics already twice on our interview, and I have noticed more and more with being, I have teenagers and I'm around the young people that are just starting their careers, that it seems that we're living in a world where money and fame is very important, especially with social media and Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, where it's all about the money and the fame. So what is your word of advice? Why do you think ethics is important still today?
It's the way we can rely on each other as human beings. It's, if I know we have a common sense of ethics, then I know there's a wide range of things I could rely on you for and trust you with.
Right.
And because I think underneath a sense of trust, which is critical to any relationship, business or personal, is understanding your ethics. I mean, there's a reason why people who like to engage in crimes like to hang out with each other. They have a similar sense of ethics. It isn't only to plan jobs together. It's,
Mm-hmm,
it's
mm-hmm,
they can get it.
mm-hmm,
So it's I even hear my youngest son, the one who was in the Navy, is an activist now. He brings food and water to Black Lives Matters protest and all that type of thing.
mm-hmm,
And ethics is a huge subject for people in he's 30 years old and in that age
mm-hmm,
range, and
mm-hmm.
it's a huge topic for them because they're so disgusted by what's happened at both the government and the corporate level in the United States that they think there's a whole need to, and their definition of ethics is centered in community. And the whole basis, the basically kind of a kibbutz like thinking, but that's the way the whole country should be.
Mm-hmm.
So ethics. I think all my kids, God bless them, have picked up on what I tried to practice in the subject of ethics.
Yeah. Yes.
And it's not that I've been exactly ethically pure in my life, but it's we all have areas where we have bent, and sometimes we've regretted it later. But at this point, it's become very, very important to me. I'd rather be around 10 people who I trust and have a common sense of ethics with than 1,000 people that I don't.
Wow, isn't that wonderful to have all that experience, even with the aches and pains of the joint sometimes?
It is. And, there's a whole thing about, I've been, there's a thing about this stage of life. There's it's very funny, there's the classic image of it's the daughter, mother, crone on the female side, and it's son, father, curmudgeon. Is the same thing on the male side in mystical thinking, if you will. And but then even before, but it's also a time where older guys get to maybe play sage a little bit, sit here and share some information more. And that's more of my relationship with my son who works for me now. Is more, he just calls me up and say, what do we do about this?
Right.
That's great. I like
Yes.
that. It's enjoyable. It's enjoyable to have a child or a grandchild call you up and say, hey, what can we do about this? So, and that's something about this stage of life that's particularly fulfilling.
Yeah. And Jonathan, have you had mentors throughout your professional life, people that really kind of came through for you and helped you out?
Only early on. There were some teachers that were two teachers in high school. My professor at the University of Maryland, when I went back to school, when I was in the military, he would sit there and listen to me just talk on and on and on. And he would just, he'd have a pipe he never lit. And he had the corduroy jacket with the leather patches on the, and he would sit in like a little rocker, and he'd just rock back and forth and nod his head, and just made me feel good about who I am. And he encouraged me to go after the job with Jack Anderson when I told him about it. So that was, he was an influence there. I think the last boss I had in the military was a good man, very good man. And he gave me Picasso's print of Don Quixote when I got out of the service, which is hanging on my wall back here still, with a little inscription from him in the back. And since then, there are now about 10 other artistic representations of Don Quixote in my home. And in terms of, spirituality, ethical values, Don Quixote's been a real good role model for me.
Oh, yeah. I know just the stories that they put of Don Quixote out, but can you give me, a little insight of how?
Well, in the classic Manilow, either the musical or the book, and I've got a very old edition of the book here at home. There's an elderly Spanish gentleman who is on his deathbed, all his relatives think, and then he decides to get off his deathbed, put on a suit of armor, and go out and fight the good fight and rescue people who need to be rescued and fight dragons or whatever. And he gets accompanied by this poor little schmo of a sidekick by the name of Sancho, who tries to keep him out of trouble. And one way to read the story is, here's a crazy guy who goes out, he has an adventure, he manages to avoid getting killed, then he comes home and dies quietly in his bed. But another way to look at it is, there's a man who listens to his inner voice and follows his passion, regardless of what other people think about him. And maybe he sees some things that other people can't see, and maybe some other people can see things that other people can't see too. In other words, don't assume that everything you see in front of your eyes is everything there is to see. And that's the attitude he had. And he saw the good. There was a tavern whore in the story who he called Dulcinea in the musical, and because he saw the beautiful woman in her. And he dressed her as the beautiful woman and majestic woman she was, and sang a song to her. So that attitude, that chivalry, all that, I'm a total sucker for that.
Oh, good. Yeah, I think it ties into what we were speaking earlier, about listening to that inner voice, even if other people can't hear, that overcoming obstacles, and sometimes people subject to be their own obstacles because of the stories they create in their head. So,
Well, in the Hindu tradition, Ganesh is the obstacle god, and
mhm,
the elephant god is the obstacle god. And I've done a lot of study of different religions, even if I'm not religious. And a lot of people think that they pray to him to remove obstacles. They don't get, he is the god of obstacles, which means that sometimes obstacles exist for a reason.
right,
And
right.
sometimes our job is to figure out why the obstacle is there. Maybe it's a
Uh-huh.
good thing.
Yes, that's right. And the question of like, why is it happening to me? Is like, why is it happening at all? What am I supposed to learn from here? Right.
I still do that. I had a really bad foot and ankle injury many years ago, and on a cold, damp day, I am reminded that I did that, and I'll do this. Oi, why
Uh-huh,
me? But
uh-huh, uh-huh.
why not? Why not me? And I have so many friends who had a lot worse than this. You
Right,
know, just to
right.
be standing with
Mm-hmm,
two vaccinations
mm-hmm,
at
mm-hmm,
age 70, that's
mm-hmm.
good. I'm glad for
Yes.
that.
And Jonathan, looking back into your life trajectory, can you pick like a time or two, having your hindsight 2020 vision, moments that seemed that were a challenge, a difficulty, but was really a blessing in disguise. It's just that before you couldn't see and you could only see afterwards. I'm just thinking about the younger people that are
Mhm,
starting their career, and
mhm.
sometimes life can be a little challenging, and we don't know why things are happening. But then, like, oh, there's almost gratitude for what happened.
Yeah, I mean, after even if it's something as mundane as, I'll back up. Keep, we didn't, of course, used to use email to write to people. We had to write to people, or at least type to people. And
Typewriters.
and so, you know, in uh, in 1994, when I started my business, uh, I had to write to hundreds of people to try to get one piece of business.
Mhm, mhm,
And sometimes I'd write to hundreds of people and get no business. And and it would have been easy, and there were certainly moments like I felt hopeless. It would have been
mhm,
easy to go there and give up and go apply for a job again somewhere.
mhm,
Um, but I come back to that inner voice again. That inner voice kept saying, "This too shall pass."
mhm, mhm,
And I have so often seen unexpected good results. Uh, Maybe not exactly on your question, but my son and I have found invariably that if we decide, for example, that we're going to target the healthcare industry, and
mhm,
we do a whole bunch of work, articles and blog posts, everything about the healthcare industry, and we hustle, double time for a whole month, we'll get a bunch of new business in the next 30 to 60 days, but it won't be from the healthcare industry.
Interesting.
We put the energy out there.
Uh-huh.
It's just, I was totally skeptical about that. That's one of the things that surprised me the most. It's like, hell, I just, well, yeah, I did work my ass off, but I got some business. It just wasn't where I
Mhm.
expected to get the business. And that
Right.
has happened over and over and over again. So many times this is statistically impossible that it be coincidence.
Uh-huh, uh-huh, uh-huh. So it's
But
just, go
yeah,
ahead.
yeah, that's right. And that, of course, reinforces any sense of faith. I think it's helped my son develop a sense of faith.
Mhm, mhm, mhm. Yeah, it's as I hear what you're saying, it's being like being the agent of your own life. And as long as you put the energy out there, the cosmos helps out and put the energy back. It's just like a partnership.
Yep. And actually, a good friend of mine yesterday said something that was really directly on point here. She said sometimes it's hard to just sit and let the situation emerge and remember that it's not an emergency.
Mhm, mhm. That's a good one.
That's a good line. That's stuck in my head. Because sometimes it just feels like an emergency right in the moment.
Uh-huh, uh-huh,
And
uh-huh.
but I've lived through real crises in my life. I've had my life really threatened in my life. I've I've had accidents that could have killed me and all that. So the thing that gets easier when you're older is you have more life experience to compare to,
Mhm,
and see, looking back, see how things work through. But for the young people who may be watching this, whatever shit you're going through, it will pass,
mhm,
and you may
mhm,
not don't. Sometimes we think the window we want to open is not the window that opens, so don't
mhm.
miss the other window. This is my message, because you
Right.
never know where it's going to be.
Uh-huh,
And
uh-huh.
Jack Anderson, that applying for that job, that's a target of opportunity. Those targets of opportunity, you got to jump on those when they're there, and
Mhm,
have the confidence. The other thing is, if you're ever going to sell business, you have to, if you're going to sell anything, you have to be able to hear no as not yet.
uh-huh, mhm,
You have to be able to hear no as not yet, or you will get depressed and discouraged. And my son, early on, when he was working with me, when he started to try to get some business of his own, he got depressed and discouraged because he got a lot of no's, because he was
mhm.
maybe in his late 20s and no experience, and was trying to reach out. And but he has found, in fact, that over time it always pays off.
So what is your advice for the people that, get no's? Like you're saying about sending, I'm imagining 1994, 100 pieces of, direct mailing. And today, with all uh, job applications, you don't know how many people apply for one job. So sometimes it's like 10, 20, 100 jobs that somebody may be applying for, and sometimes they don't even hear the no, they just don't hear at all. So what is your piece of advice for them to not give up?
If what you're trying to do is truly your passion, then just tune into that passion. Tune into that passion. Just keep saying, this is what I really want to do. I'm willing to pay the price. I'm willing to pay my dues to do what I want to do. And it, unconditional surrender, really, to the situation in which you voluntarily put yourself for whatever period. And then at some point, sometimes you have to accept, no, that's not going to work. We have tried some business development directions that totally failed. And we spent a lot of time and money on certain types of marketing that just didn't work at all. But it's, I don't think everything I do is going to work. I think collectively what I do will work.
So each and every time that you do something is more like an experience that you acquiring.
Yes,
Sounds
everything's
like.
experience. Everything's
Mhm,
everything's an experience, and everything we do is an opportunity to be of service.
mhm,
Something I learned from a mentor of mine years ago.
mhm, mhm, mhm. We have about 5 minutes or so to go, and Jonathan, I'm wondering, is there something that through your career that you looking back wished you would have done differently?
Hmm. Um, yeah, I probably would have gone to work for myself 5 years earlier, before I joined the last full-time PR firm I joined. I mean, it was another experience to add to my resume, and that was great. But I think I probably could have made it just as well 5 years earlier. But it's not. That's not even a huge regret. I really don't have any major regrets, other than I wish I was 30 years younger.
Well, you look very young to me over there.
Thank you, thank you. So far, not bad, not bad so far. So
Uh-huh, uh-huh. And so, and also, um, I usually ask that for women that has to juggle much family, children, career, but the guys, more and more also having to juggle, because now we have two working parents and the family, and both are becoming breadwinners. How did you do?
We did it during my kids' school years. My wife and I both worked at home. She was an artist and yoga instructor, and so in that sense, it was easy. We shared the job basically. I mean, she drove the kids to school, I drove the kids to school, soccer practice, whatever it was. We shared the responsibilities, and it seemed to work until the kids could drive themselves, and then that was a blessing. but so that's it was probably easier for me. I can't imagine doing that if I was still commuting to an office somewhere, or if we were both commuting to an office. That would have been really hard.
Okay. Um, any more words of wisdom on this Wednesday for us, Jonathan?
If
Anything
you're
else you want to tell?
if you are an American, please spend some time in a third world country before you get much older. If you possibly can visit a third world country and see how people live there, um, so that you can appreciate where we live. Because the biggest obstacle, one of the biggest sources of crises in the US is the arrogance of American leadership. And the thought, and that comes from a basis of not seeing what it's like to see children with swollen bellies. And I was born and raised by a career diplomat, so I was raised in 6 different countries, including Nigeria and Korea, long before Korea was modern. So I literally saw children starving on the streets when I was 8 years old, and it made a major impression on me. And back here in the United States, we have it so good, and the opportunity is so much greater than most parts of the world, that, and particularly with COVID now lifting, but it's hard to appreciate unless you've seen just how difficult other people have it.
Wow, thank you for that. I completely agree with you. I backpack for about 2.5 years through leaving United States all the way down to Brazil, where I'm from,
Yeah.
through land, and then Southeast Asia. And I volunteer for many different organizations, and education is one of my passions. Education is transformation of the human being. So, and I designed a few trips to take Americans down to Latin America to volunteer and see how people live, to help them have that aha moment, right? Like, oh, right. I don't have much to complain driving my Lexus or Subaru or Tesla into work.
I don't care if you're driving anything, you got no complaints, right? So, and yeah, no, it's different. And I'm also, that's the latter part, and you can leave this off the interview, I don't care. But I'm also a Reiki practitioner. So, and for the last 7-8 years now, that's been Reiki healing, and that whole world has been a much bigger part of my life. And that's probably what I'm going to be doing a great deal over the next 30 years, I hope.
Well, we are not going to leave that out of the interview. So, but now you picked my interest. So your transition seems like, again, to something new. So Reiki and, healing and energy. And how did you discover that? On your third reincarnation?
About 8 years ago, 3 different doctors wanted to do surgery on my neck because I had lost 2/3 of the strength and coordination in my right hand I was a soccer goalie for 25, 30 years. I played ice hockey, judo, karate, a lot of things that resulted in my body hitting the ground a lot. So, and I didn't want to get surgery. And I got quiet and listened to my inner voice, and it told me to find a healer. Now, I had never felt called to find a healer before. I've had some experience of alternative forms of healing work, but I Googled healer Pasadena, because that's my area I'm in here, and it almost immediately found a website of the woman who became my teacher. And but first I went to see her because she was a Reiki practitioner and somatic healer, worked with releasing trauma in the body, and I had a fair amount of that growing up. And within 3 months of working with her, I had full use of my And again, I was so fascinated even before that 3 months by what she was doing, I had to learn for myself. And when you first study Reiki, you become a practitioner. Reiki 1 is you practice on yourself. Reiki 2, you can then practice on someone else. Reiki Master, which is what I am now, you can teach Reiki 1 and Reiki 2. And then I started, even though I had started with a totally skeptical viewpoint, I couldn't argue with the results. And then when I started working with others, I couldn't argue with the results. And now I'm part of a volunteer program with Huntington Memorial Hospital here in Pasadena. We provide Reiki support to their nursing staff. And we've been doing that all during the COVID crisis. And they love it. They love it. So, so that's what attracted me. And then of course that resulted in me being interested in shamanism. And I'm also a singer and musician. So I have, a drum here and my guitar, and I integrate my music and drumming into my healing work.
Oh, wonderful. Wow.
So I have a right brain. I have a right brain too, not just a left brain.
That's good. That is good that to have a job that you're good at, and also all those, it's more than hobbies, but all those affinities on the side that you can help others as well. That's wonderful.
And I have an absolute passion for those, the same way I had a passion for my career. I'm losing my passion for my career just a little after all the years, but I have a tremendous amount of passion for this new healing work. And so I hope that's what I'm going to be doing for, the indefinite future.
Right. I think it's worth remembering that, sometimes you go into things that doesn't have to be for the rest of our lives. It could be for 5 years. It could be for 10 years because it's right now. But in 5 years, we are different people. The world is different, and it may not be the right thing. The same way that maybe you didn't start your own business 5 years earlier because it wasn't the right timing, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And I don't, it's, I've heard a phrase, we will not regret the past nor wish to shut the door on it. So, that's a good way to look. We learn from those things. We don't sit there and agonize over what ifs in business or personal decisions.
Right. And not everything that emerges is an emergency. I'll keep that
one. Exactly. There you go. I'll tell my friend Marion that this has been propagated further now.
Yes. Well, Jonathan, thank you so much for your time and sharing your experience with us. And I can see already some pearls of what was talked here about, and I hope it's of help to others as well.
I hope it does too. And who doesn't like talking about themselves for an hour, right?
Well, thank you so much. And I wish you all the best with your new unfolding next 30 years.
And I wish you all the best with teenagers.
Okay. Thank you so much. You take good care.
All right. Bye.
Bye-bye. Hello, my dear friends here on the Wisdom Wednesday. And I think to me that was such a lesson that Jonathan left us with the not everything that emerges is an emergency. And I remember being younger and thinking, I have to resolve everything right here, right now. And sometimes we just need to let it sit for a little while, and sometimes the solution will come. Sometimes the solution will come, and not to get discouraged if you didn't get that job that you really wanted and put time and effort into it, and just like trust the experiences that are coming our way and how we react to them. And another thing that I came away from our interview with Jonathan Berstein today was the necessity to sometimes being quiet. I think we have so much distraction in our world. Cell phones, social media, Netflix, music, it's just like, those are all good things. I do them. And I also think it's necessary to just sometimes quiet the mind, quiet the conversations, quiet the doubts, the fears, and just center ourselves in our heart and just listen to the heart rather than the head sometimes. I am Daniela Baker, and I was so happy to be here with you today. We had a little thing with our live, but that's okay. We are putting the record out there. I wish you all well. Be well. Take good care.